The air was thick with the smell of wet earth, the kind that tells you a storm had passed through not too long ago. The forest, deep and tangled, seemed alive with the sounds of nature, but there was something off about it today. The wind didn't feel right. It whispered through the trees in strange ways, almost as if it was trying to tell me something. I had no reason to be out here, but there I was, walking down a path that felt more like a trap with every step. I had been wandering for what felt like hours, looking for anything to distract me from the mess my life had become. A job I hated, friends I barely talked to, a house that didn't feel like home anymore. The forest, with its eerie silence and dark shadows, seemed to call to me. It was a place I used to visit as a kid, but this time felt different. As I pushed through the thick brush, my foot hit something solid. At first, I thought it was just a rock, but when I bent down, I saw it, a small, rusted key lying half buried in the dirt. It looked ancient, the metal covered in grime, with strange markings carved into its surface. I could barely make them out, but they seemed to swirl around the key, twisting in unnatural ways. It was the kind of thing you wouldn't expect to find just lying in the woods. I stared at it for a long moment, my breath shallow. It didn't feel like a random object. It felt wrong, like it didn't belong here. But I picked it up anyway. Maybe it was my curiosity, or maybe it was the pull of something I couldn't explain, but something about that key seemed to call to me. I turned it over in my hand, feeling its weight. The forest around me seemed to grow quieter, like the trees were watching me. I tried to shake off the feeling. It was just a key. It didn't mean anything. Or at least, that's what I told myself. But as I stood up, I realized something. There was a door in front of me. It wasn't there a second ago. One moment, the space in front of me was clear, and the next, a wooden door stood against the trees, its frame weathered and worn, almost like it had been hidden in the forest for centuries. The key in my hand seemed to pulse, almost as if it knew what I was thinking. I took a step toward it, the key feeling heavier in my hand with each movement. My heart started to race. What was this? A door in the middle of the woods? I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Something about it wasn't right, but my feet kept moving toward it, as if some invisible force was guiding me. The closer I got, the more I felt it. The door seemed to be pulling me in, and I couldn't understand why. Was it an illusion? Some kind of trick my mind was playing on me? No, it was real. It was too solid, too present to be anything but real. I reached the door, and I didn't hesitate. The key fit perfectly in the lock, as though it had been made for this exact moment. The sound of the metal turning in the lock was loud in the quiet of the forest, echoing in my ears. My heart hammered in my chest, and then I opened it. The world around me shifted. The air grew colder, darker, and the world behind me, the woods, the trees, the clearing, seemed to fade. I stood at the threshold of something I couldn't explain, and I had no idea what lay beyond that door. I should have turned back right then. I should have locked that door and never looked back. But I didn't. I stepped through, not knowing that I was crossing into something far darker than I could have ever imagined. And as I closed the door behind me, I heard the faintest whisper, carried by the wind. It said my name. The moment I stepped through that door, everything changed. It felt like I was pulled into another world, one that didn't make sense. The air was thick and heavy, unlike anything I had felt outside. It wasn't just the cold, it was a sense of stillness, like everything was holding its breath. I stood in a dimly lit room, the walls made of stone, rough and cold to the touch. I reached out to steady myself, my fingertips brushing against the stone, and shivered. I was disoriented. There was no sound, no wind, no birds. The world outside, the forest I had just come from, seemed so far away. I couldn't see a single window, no light from the outside world, just shadows stretching long across the floor. But there was something about the room that felt alive. It was almost as if the room itself was watching me. The first thing I noticed was a large, dusty wooden table in the center of the room. The table had strange carvings etched into it, symbols I didn't recognize. My stomach churned as I looked at them. They weren't just random scratches or marks. They were deliberate, each one connected to the other in a pattern that made no sense. I could feel my heart pounding faster, the unease creeping up on me. I had to get out. But something kept me rooted in place. I looked around, trying to focus, trying to find a way out, but the room seemed endless. Each corner was swallowed by darkness, and the air felt oppressive. I felt as though I was being drawn deeper into something I couldn't escape. I took a few slow steps toward the table, my feet moving almost on their own, as if they were being pulled by some unseen force. I stopped just short of the table, and that's when I saw it. There was a small, old box resting on the surface, its wood as dark and weathered as the rest of the room. It was closed, locked with a thick metal clasp. The box looked ancient, its surface covered in dust, but it felt like it had been waiting for me. I reached for it without thinking. My hand brushed against the cold metal, and the moment I touched it, a low hum vibrated through my fingers. A strange sensation washed over me. My vision blurred for a moment, and I could almost hear whispers, too soft to understand. It felt like they were coming from the box, or maybe from the room itself. My skin prickled, and I yanked my hand back, but the hum lingered in the air. It was then that I heard it, a soft click from the corner of the room. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. Slowly, I turned my head toward the noise. In the farthest corner of the room, a door had appeared out of nowhere. I hadn't seen it when I first entered. It wasn't there before. The wood was old, the edges frayed, and the handle looked like it had been touched by time. It was the kind of door that promised nothing good would come from opening it. I should have turned around, should have run back to the door I'd come through. But I didn't. I walked toward the new door, my feet dragging, my body feeling like it was moving of its own accord. The door seemed to beckon me. As I approached, the temperature dropped even more, and the whispers grew louder, though still too quiet to make out. I stood before the door, staring at the handle. I didn't want to touch it, didn't want to open it, but the urge was too strong. My hand reached out. The moment my fingers brushed the handle, I heard a loud thud from behind me, like something heavy falling to the ground. I whipped around, my pulse racing. But there was nothing. Only the room. Only the door. And only the whispers that were now louder, clearer, as if they were trying to tell me something. They were calling my name. I shouldn't have listened. But I did. And I turned the handle. The moment my hand touched the handle, everything changed. The room felt colder, the air thicker. I felt an unnatural pressure around me, like the walls were closing in, and for a split second, I thought I might suffocate right there. But it wasn't the air that made it unbearable, it was the silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. The only sound I could hear was my own heartbeat, racing in my chest like it was trying to break free. I took a deep breath and twisted the handle. The door creaked, a low, painful sound that made my skin crawl. As it opened, the room beyond was cloaked in shadow, but I could feel a presence, something waiting. The temperature dropped even further, and I hesitated for a moment, standing in the doorway, my mind fighting with itself. Should I step through? Should I go back? But the whispers, they were louder now. I could hear my name clearly, like someone, something, was calling me. I stepped forward, one foot crossing the threshold, and the door slammed shut behind me with a deafening thud. The noise echoed in the small space, sending a sharp jolt of fear straight into my veins. I spun around, but there was no door. No exit. The room I just entered was even darker than the last, the air heavy with dust and something else. Something old. Too old. The whispers were coming from all around me now, too many to make sense of. They were voices, human but not quite. They swirled in the air, filling my mind with static. I took another step forward, my feet feeling like they were moving of their own accord. The floor beneath me creaked, as though it were alive, shifting with each step. I could feel it beneath my skin, a pressure, a pulse. Whatever was in this room was waiting for something. Or someone. And then I saw it. At the far side of the room, there was something sitting on the floor. A pile of old, tattered cloth. It was like it had been thrown there, discarded and forgotten. My mind screamed at me to leave, but my feet betrayed me, carrying me closer. As I reached it, I could see that it wasn't just cloth. It was a cloak, an old, torn cloak, with symbols embroidered in gold thread, symbols that looked almost identical to the ones on the box I had found earlier. I reached out, my fingers trembling as I brushed the edge of the cloak. The moment I touched it, the air around me shifted. It felt like the room took a deep, collective breath, and in that moment, I knew something was wrong, terribly wrong. I pulled my hand back, but the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They were no longer calling my name, but saying something else, something I couldn't quite make out. But it didn't matter. I felt it. The room was alive, and it wasn't happy I was there. I backed away from the cloak, feeling the weight of unseen eyes on me. The shadows in the room seemed to shift, to breathe, and I felt a chill run through me, deep in my bones. I spun around again, trying to find something, anything, that would make sense of this. There was nothing. No exit. No escape. Just darkness, stretching out before me like an endless abyss. Suddenly, the whispers stopped. It was as though the room had gone silent again. But this silence was different. This wasn't the emptiness I had felt when I first entered. This silence had a weight to it. It was oppressive, suffocating. And then I heard it. The sound so soft at first, I thought I might have imagined it. A slow, deliberate scrape against the stone floor, like something was dragging itself toward me. I froze. My body refused to move, my mind locked in place as I listened. The scraping sound grew louder, closer, and I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. Slowly, I turned my head toward the source of the sound. And then I saw it. A figure was moving toward me in the shadows. It was tall, impossibly tall, its limbs stretching out at strange angles. Its face was obscured, but I could feel its eyes, burning holes into me from the darkness. I couldn't breathe. My legs wouldn't move. The figure was coming closer, and I couldn't stop it. It stopped a few feet away, and for a moment, I thought it might speak, might explain what was happening. But instead, it tilted its head, as if considering me. I wanted to scream, wanted to run, but my throat was tight, my body paralyzed. The figure reached up with one long, thin hand, pointing directly at me. I didn't know why, but I followed the direction of its finger. And there, in the far corner of the room, was a door. A door I hadn't noticed before. It looked old, worn, and completely out of place. The figure's fingers stayed pointed at the door, and the whispers started again, louder this time, more frantic. I wanted to understand them, wanted to know what they were saying, but the more I tried, the more lost I became. The voices were blending together, twisting and warping, until they no longer sounded like words at all. The air felt thick, like something was suffocating me, and I realized I wasn't breathing. I forced myself to take a breath, a deep, painful inhale that burned in my lungs. When I exhaled, I didn't feel better. I felt worse. The figure was still watching me, unmoving, waiting. I could hear the whispers, clearer now, and they were unmistakably calling me, telling me to go to the door, to open it. Something inside me screamed not to do it, but I had no choice. I couldn't stop myself. I moved toward the door, my feet dragging against the stone floor, my head spinning. The closer I got, the more I felt it, the pull, the tug, like something was dragging me forward. Every step was harder than the last, but I couldn't stop. I reached the door. My hand trembled as I reached for the handle. It was cold to the touch, like it had been waiting for me too. I gripped it and turned, but as I did, I felt the figure move behind me. I didn't want to look, but I had to. I turned, and the figure was gone. Just like that. Vanished. But the room wasn't empty anymore. I opened the door, and what I saw on the other side wasn't just another room. It was the forest. The same forest I had wandered through before. But it wasn't the same. It was darker, twisted, almost unrecognizable. The trees were bent in unnatural ways, their branches reaching out like fingers, clawing at the sky. The ground beneath my feet felt uneven, as if the earth itself was shifting. And the air smelled wrong. It smelled of decay, of something ancient and forgotten. I stepped through the door, and I knew deep down that I had crossed a line I couldn't come back from. Whatever had been waiting for me in that room, it wasn't finished. It was just beginning. And I had opened the door. I stepped through the door, my heart hammering in my chest as I entered the twisted version of the forest. The air felt different, heavier, like it was trying to pull me down into the earth. The trees loomed above me, their branches thick and tangled, as though they were trying to keep something locked inside. It wasn't the forest I remembered. It was darker, colder, as if time itself had stopped. There were no sounds of birds or rustling leaves. It was eerily quiet, but the silence felt wrong, unnatural. I turned back to the door, hoping to see the room again, the one I had come from. But it wasn't there. There was only the blackened space where it had been, like it had never existed. I reached out, my hand shaking as if I could somehow pull it back. But it was gone. The door was gone. I was trapped in this place with no way to get out. I had no choice but to move forward. My legs felt heavy, each step a battle against the invisible weight pressing down on me. As I walked, I kept expecting something to move in the shadows. I could feel the eyes of something watching me, but whenever I turned to look, nothing was there. Just the trees, just the darkness. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that something, or someone, was following me. Then I heard it, a low, guttural growl. It echoed through the trees, bouncing off the trunks and rattling my bones. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The growl wasn't far, it was close. Too close. I turned, searching the darkness for the source. My eyes strained, trying to make sense of the shadows, but there was nothing. No animal. No creature. Just the eerie stillness of the forest. I forced myself to keep moving, my feet dragging through the dirt. But the growl followed me. It was getting louder, closer, as if whatever was making it was circling, stalking me. Every step felt like it took me deeper into the heart of this nightmare. And then I saw it. In the distance, barely visible through the thick trees, was a figure. A shadow moving swiftly, too fast to be human. It darted between the trunks, its movement fluid, unnatural. It was like something out of a nightmare, something that shouldn't be real. My heart pounded in my chest, and I wanted to run, but I couldn't. My body refused to obey. The figure was coming closer, moving in jerky, unnatural motions, its eyes glowing with a faint, ominous light. I stumbled backward, my mind racing. What was that thing? What did it want? Was it the thing that had been waiting for me in that room? I couldn't stop myself from turning and running. My legs carried me faster than I thought was possible, my breath ragged in my chest, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the empty forest. But the figure was faster. It was right behind me, so close I could feel its presence, like a shadow hanging over me, suffocating me. I could hear its breath, ragged and heavy, and then, the growl again, closer this time. I could feel its hot breath on my neck, and I knew, without a doubt, that it was going to catch me. I had to get away. I had to escape. Ahead, I saw a clearing, a faint light cutting through the darkness. I pushed myself harder, not caring where it led. I just needed to get away from the thing behind me. But as I burst into the clearing, I stopped dead in my tracks. The clearing wasn't empty. It was a graveyard. Old tombstones rose from the ground, cracked and broken, their surfaces worn with age. In the center of the clearing stood an altar, a stone slab, covered in moss. And at the foot of the altar, a body. A body wrapped in that same cloak, the one I had seen in the room, the one with the strange symbols. The body lay still, lifeless, but there was something wrong with it. Something that made my skin crawl. It wasn't dead. I could feel it. I slowly stepped closer, my eyes locked on the body. The figure behind me was still in pursuit, its growl growing louder. It was almost upon me, but I couldn't look away from the body. I felt drawn to it, like I had to see what was under that cloak, what was hidden beneath. I moved closer, my legs shaking, my breath shallow. I knelt beside the body, my fingers trembling as I reached out to pull back the cloak. What I saw made my stomach drop. It was me. The figure, the one that had been chasing me, had been me. It had been my own reflection, twisted, distorted, inhuman. But it wasn't me anymore. It was something else, something worse. I couldn't breathe. The growl was deafening now, and I realized too late that I hadn't been running from it. I had been running toward it. The truth was right in front of me, in that clearing, in that graveyard. I had walked into something I shouldn't have. And now there was no escape. A hand grabbed my shoulder, spinning me around. I didn't need to look to know who it was. It was me. But it wasn't me. And as the growl rose to a deafening roar, I felt the cold, sharp grip of whatever I had unleashed, pulling me into the darkness. The forest wasn't a place anymore. It was a trap. And I had just walked right into it. Everything went black. I woke up lying on cold stone, a sharp chill running through me. My hands were bound, my legs stiff from lying still for what felt like hours. I blinked, trying to adjust my vision, but the darkness was thick, like I had been pulled into the night itself. I could hear nothing but my breath, shallow and panicked. My body trembled, but I couldn't tell if it was from fear or the freezing cold. I tried to sit up, but the moment I moved, I felt something cold touch my wrist, pulling me back down. The air was thick with the smell of decay, something rotting, something ancient. I turned my head, fighting against the panic rising in my chest, my heart pounding with each breath. The growl from earlier, the one that had haunted me through the forest, echoed again, but it wasn't distant now. It was right there in the same room. I forced my eyes to focus, seeing shapes moving in the dark. The shadows twisted unnaturally, as if the darkness itself had a life of its own. The walls of the room, or what I assumed were walls, seemed to stretch and contract, like the space around me was alive. I could feel the walls closing in, suffocating me. A soft sound broke the silence, a shuffling noise that made my skin crawl. I didn't need to turn around to know what it was. The thing I had seen in the forest, the twisted version of myself, it was here. It had found me. The figure stepped into view, its eyes glowing faintly in the darkness, like two lanterns in the void. I could see now. It was me, but not me. The face was wrong, too pale, too twisted. The eyes were wide, unblinking, and full of malice. It smiled, but it wasn't a smile that gave any comfort. It was the kind of smile that made you question your own reflection. The figure reached out with long, bony fingers, grabbing my chin with an iron grip. I felt the coldness of its touch seep into my skin, like it was draining the warmth from me. "Why did you come here?" It whispered, its voice a broken version of mine. I tried to speak, to ask where I was, what this place was, But my words failed me. The figure leaned closer, its breath foul against my face. I could feel its dark presence, pressing against me, consuming me. The door was still behind me, just out of reach. I couldn't escape it, not yet. Not until I understood what had brought me here. My eyes flicked back to the twisted figure that was holding me captive, and for a moment, I saw something in its eyes. It wasn't just malice. It was recognition. And then I understood. I had unlocked something I shouldn't have. Something that didn't belong in this world. That key had been a symbol, a trigger, a gateway to this place, to this nightmare. But it wasn't just the door I had opened. I had opened a part of myself, a part that had been buried deep down. The figure was the darkness I had ignored, the part of me I had feared, and now it was free. The walls started closing in faster. The growl grew louder until it became a roar. The room was collapsing, folding in on itself, twisting around me. My vision blurred, and I realized, in that moment of pure terror, that there was no escape. This place, this nightmare, was my own doing. I had brought it upon myself. And now, there was no going back.